Cool story from her. Beauty out of the ashes. Very nicely done. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Very good. So, Nicole, thank you so much for being here and your giving today.
Well, like she said, I'm Nicole Sunley. I'm very happy you are all here. I would like to start out by thanking Bolton Refuge House for inviting me to come speak to you all tonight. And I would like to take you on my life-changing and meaningful journey with them. It all started about 3 years ago, shortly after my daughter was born. So to bring you up to speed, I was married to a man that I thought was good for me, that I thought was the best I could ever have, and that I thought was normal. Unfortunately, these thoughts were not healthy because they were the result of being in a relationship with someone who was manipulative, controlling, and abusive. Well, I met my ex-husband now at a very low time in my life. I just lost my dad unexpectedly, and I was about to lose my grandma to stage 4 lung cancer. So he kind of got me at a very, very low point in my life. Now, people go through stages of grieving differently, and my mom was ready to move on and start dating again. And I'll admit, I was not ready to accept someone new in her life just yet, but there is nothing wrong with going through grieving differently than someone else. But at the time, my boyfriend, Matt, said things like, "Your mom's been ready to move on for a long time, even when your dad was around." No, she wasn't. How could he even say things like that about her? He hardly knew her. Unfortunately, though, he said them, and it made me feel better about where I was emotionally with my grieving. Looking back on it now, it was the beginning of him isolating me from my family. Move forward a bit, we got married, as I thought it would help the situation I was in. Alone, sad, all the time, despite the fact that I was with someone every minute of every day because we lived together. We actually had his parents living with us for a while. And Matt's words and actions got worse and worse, that they too began to withdraw from us, and they ended up moving out of our house. So again, I thought maybe we should have a kid. It might make it easier. We might feel like more of a whole family. So after a month of trying, he got frustrated with me. And I went into the soon-to-be baby room, and I started crying. He came in the room, he yelled at me and threatened me, and held me down on the ground with his hand over my throat, making it almost impossible to breathe. 2 weeks later, I found out I was 6 weeks pregnant, and it hit me like a brick wall that I could have lost her that day. Had it not been for the fact that I said, "Okay, you win, can you leave me alone now?" 7 months later, my beautiful little girl Madison was born. And if you hear anybody crying, it's her. She's probably running around. But she was born. And if you knew me at all growing up, you knew that I wanted nothing more in the world to be a mom, because I had one of the best myself. So my dream came true that day. The hard part was Matt didn't want any distractions in our hospital room. So I was not allowed to have any of my family come and share that time with me. I did text my mom the morning I went into labor, and she did not find out until the very next day that both Madison and myself were doing fine. And I can't imagine the stress she went through that day. But somehow, some sneaky way, she was able to get into the hospital my very last day I was there and bring my younger brother. And I could not have been happier to see them because I missed them so much. And it's an exciting time. You have your first child. You want to share that with everybody because it's so exciting. About a week and a half after my daughter was born, Matt was arrested. He was arrested for breaking an heirloom of mine from my dad, and he did it in front of me while I was nursing our newborn daughter. He was charged with criminal damage to property, given no contact with me, and supervised contact with our daughter. Shortly after that, I went in for my month postpartum appointment. And if you've had kids, you know how stressful that time is. You know that postpartum depression is very real. So you tack on trying to figure out how to feed your newborn child, how to get into a sleeping cycle, how to make sure that you still function as a human being. You tack on all of that on top of what I was already going through, I was so overwhelmed. So I went in that day for the appointment, and the midwife that I was working with, she asked me the question, do you have thoughts of harming yourself or your child? And I answered her right away, absolutely not. Madison is a godsend, and I don't know what I'd do without her right now. I'm pretty sure I'm still around so I can take care of her. And she sensed there was something else off. In the beginning of meeting, when you find out you're pregnant, you get asked the question, do you feel safe at home? And I was there with Matt during that appointment. And I remember having to lie to the doctor because I was afraid something would happen to me or my child if it came back to him that I told the truth. But at that postpartum appointment, he wasn't there. So I let Annie Bailey know, the midwife, exactly what I was going through. And she got up from her chair because I was crying and I couldn't keep it together anymore after telling her what I'd been through. And she gave me a big hug. And she said, I'm going to help you. I want to get you a list of resources and I want you to call Bolton Refuge House. This is the most I can do for you here and now, but I want you to at least call. So I did. Shortly after that, I began meeting with Karen, going to counseling at Bolton, and I started talking to Pat about options, what I was going to do. Both women made me feel whole again, more whole than I had in a while, and they validated my feelings, and they never let me take on the burden alone. They were so great. Karen especially was good at accommodating to my schedule because I still needed to be a new mom, I still needed to function, and I still had to have some sense of structure in my life while talking through the things I needed to. Pat and I began discussing options of what I was going to do next, and I decided mid-July of 2017 that I was going to file for divorce soon. The plan was to move all of mine and Madison's belongings out of our house and into storage. And on the day that I filed, I would move into Bolton, because at the time, Matt had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and he was experiencing manic episodes and was becoming very violent to a lot of people that he knew. So it was decided for safety purposes that we moved there and stayed there until my new apartment would be open mid-September, because I didn't want to bring any harm to anyone I knew should we stay with them. And it wasn't a decision I took lightly, because I had to take in that I needed to move to somewhere that could keep me and my daughter safe, because apparently the person that I thought loved and cared about me could not. So upon moving into Bolton, the advocates there were all so great to me and Madison. They would all say, good morning as we would walk out, and it's so good to see you again. Did you have a good day when we got back? But there was one instance, one early September night, a couple days after we had moved in. I was coming back from my mom's house. I would go there to have dinner most nights, and I didn't actually stay too long at Bolton when I was there. I would usually just go there to sleep at night, get ready, and go to work the next morning. But I was so emotionally distraught that night that I began crying as I was driving home. And without realizing, I had ran a red light. And it was at the intersection near the Leader Telegram. And within seconds, an officer pulled me over. And he came up to the window. I was trying to compose myself. Wasn't working at all. But he came up, asked the question, do you know why I pulled you over tonight? I said, honestly, officer, I don't know. I apologize, whatever it was. He said, you ran a red light back there. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I will gladly pay the ticket. I'm completely at fault. And then he asked, well, where are you going tonight? Because it was getting dark out, and I'm sure he was just concerned about us. So I pointed, said there, to Bolton. And instantly, his demeanor changed. And he looked at me, and he said, you know what? I'm gonna let this go. I just wanna make sure you guys are okay. Please take care of that little girl and yourself. I thanked him, and we went our separate ways. That night I walked into Bolton, and the gal behind the front counter said, how was your day? I heard the usual. And I was finally able to laugh about what had just happened. Hot mess walking through the door, And she still asks me, how are you doing today? And I said, you know what, I'm pretty sure I'm the biggest mess that officer saw today. And she said, if this is hot mess for you, you're doing really good. I know, thanks. And I laughed because I was finally able to realize that I was making it